Oh boy, what a video topic idea to end the year with here in 2025, but here we go. I've been talking on this channel for years on how studios and companies, they need to stop talking down to their audiences when it comes to making content these days. It really doesn't matter what it is. Movies, TV, games, it's all the same in the end when it comes to messaging. The truth is that people are honestly sick of this hall monitor behavior, and it's reflective both in ticket sales, Netflix shows, and now even video games too. So let's talk about First Light, the new 007 game, a bit of Stranger Things while we're at it, and more. Yep, this will be fun and kind of a mess. So this all started when Monster Vine, as seen here, spoke to IO Interactive about First Light. That's the new James Bond game coming out in 2026. IO Interactive are the masterminds behind the Hitman series, which made their first foray into James Bond a natural fit for, well, obvious reasons. Looking at First Light, the game seems like a fusion of Hitman meets Uncharted, which is totally up my alley since I do love the Uncharted games. However, like usual, when it comes to westernized games these days, you always need to keep them at arm reach. You have to pat them down and check for zombie bites if you're gonna let them into your house. And right now, there's a big chunk that's missing out of First Light's neck based on what's being said in this interview alone. So Monster Vine interviewed Martin Emborg, who's the cinematic and narrative director of First Light. So this Martin guy is practically in charge of everything that has to do with First Light's story, its characters, its themes, all of that and more. Anyway, Monster Vine would ask Martin this, which reads, Bond is known for being a smooth talker and at times a womanizer. Will we be seeing this side of him? Martin would respond, yeah, you will, but obviously, as they were saying on stage before, the character Bond has evolved. So he's evolved through the decades, and obviously, we reflect modern values. So it's not going to be your old school Bond, which would just be tone deaf in this day, right? He's a modern guy. Yep, so this ended up causing the internet, especially on Twitter, to go, what do you mean by that, Martin, exactly? Like, what are you trying to say? This leads to places like FRVR, as seen here, reporting this exact same interview, with those godforsaken words like modern values, which is basically just another way of saying this was made for a modern audience. Oh god, why again? It's equally annoying and stupid because we all know what this is going to mean. It means that James Bond and IO Interactive's version of this character will be some millennial zoomer version of James Bond, like some weird mixture, which means sure, he'll shoot bad guys and drive fast cars, but he will now not be a womanizer. And he won't be seeing women like a game of hunt like Bond has in so many other iterations of his character, which ultimately kind of misses the entire integral point of why people enjoy James Bond as a character in the first place. Let's be real, and this is just the truth, James Bond is made for male audiences first, right? He's the ultimate power fantasy that any man can relate to and wants to emulate himself. He's handsome, fit, drives expensive cars, goes to like exotic locations, and he beds plenty of beautiful women. If you're offended by that, you're simply not a James Bond fan because that's what his character is. He's always been a womanizer. In Hollywood, when a new 007 film would get made, there would be literal casting calls for characters named Bond girls, which were usually the hottest and most sought after up-and-coming female actors of their era starring in these Bond films too. And James Bond would be played by whoever was considered the most successful and sought after male actor of their time too. Pierce Brosnan and GoldenEye is a great example, and of course great late actors who depicted the character like Roger Moore, and of course, Sean Connery. James Bond was always depicted as the suave, lethal, badass super spy, which has obviously influenced many of a game or media across the modern landscape. Go look at Uncharted, which First Light obviously pulls from because Uncharted stars Nathan Drake, and at the core of that franchise, Nathan Drake is basically what if James Bond and like Indiana Jones found the fusion earrings from Dragon Ball Z and combined themselves into a single character. Nathan Drake, like James Bond, is a big reason why the Uncharted games sold the way that they did. Because during that time, Uncharted in a lot of ways was catering on all fronts to a very large audience of eager fans in various different franchises. If you wanted the dastardly charismatic leading man that was betting women, going to exotic locations, Nathan did all of that and more. If you wanted cool explosions and set pieces like you were in a movie or something, Uncharted did that too, like all the time as well. All Nathan Drake was missing pretty much was like MI6 in his ear, and it would pretty much be like a one-to-one transition of the character. Just replace bioweapon bad guys with ancient mystical artifacts, and it still tracks. Looking at First Light's gameplay, it looks fun, okay? I'm not gonna lie, it looks like a fun time. It's pretty obvious that IO Interactive excels at sandbox experiences since they've been doing Hitman for years at this point. In the state of play footage of First Light, which as of this video being made is the only extended gameplay that's available right now, you can see how the Hitman DNA translates into First Light in a very cohesive way. You have multiple points of entry. Bond can climb buildings to enter through the windows to get in. You can impersonate guardsmen or go in guns blazing if you want to. It's really up to you. Even when First Light shows the bombastic element of its gameplay, it's very clearly taking inspiration from the Uncharted games for a very good reason. Because if you ask me, the gaming industry is kind of sorely in need of an Uncharted-like hero experience, if I'm being honest. We don't really have those anymore. Which is why on paper, a proper new James Bond video game that inhabits and exemplifies all the elements of James Bond as a character would do, in theory, very, very well in the video game landscape today. But again, the fact that the narrative and cinematic director straight up said that the old elements of Bond wouldn't hold up or be there, that is the biggest red flag for me. Again, it's the same problem that plagues so many modern video games and movies. Sure, the gameplay is probably fun, the interactive elements will be great, the graphics and the music and the sound design, they'll all be top-notch probably, okay? But like always. And this extends with movies and TV too. It's the modernized slop elements that will take what could be amazing products and then turning them into lecturing halls that nobody wants to listen to anymore. Let me pivot for a second to prove what I mean, okay? Let's look at Stranger Things, since that's pretty much hot when this video is coming out too. Like when this video does come out, by the way, the final episode will be airing on New Year's Eve. However, in the penultimate episode of Stranger Things, you probably heard or saw how Will, that's one of the main characters, he spends like multiple minutes just telling the entire cast of Stranger Things how he's gay, how he likes boys and not girls. And the internet rightfully had the sort of reaction that you would expect, which was mass utter fatigue. Because people are tired of this sort of stuff in their media. Like, you guys need to fight a weird twink with like a melted body that uses psychic mind powers. Why are we wasting precious time talking about how this kid loves boys over girls? Who cares right now? There's more important things to do. What's even more baffling is that the creators of Stranger Things, that's the Duffer Brothers, admitted, as seen here from Games Radar, that the Will coming out scene took the longest to write out of any other scene in Season 5, which, as for someone who has watched Season 5 of Stranger Things, I can tell, because the writing has been nothing short of butt cheeks wrapped in dookie, if I'm being honest. It's terrible writing. It feels like Game of Thrones final season all over again. Maybe they nailed the finale. This is being written before that gets released, so I don't know yet, but the mass fatigue to Stranger Things is exactly why you're getting the same sort of reaction to First Light's narrative director flat out saying that our James Bond will not be a womanizer. He's modern now. He's too good for that sort of thing. He respects women. Okay, but may I suggest something that will anger people, but it kind of has to be said? But what if, and I know this is crazy, what if James Bond's womanizing elements are why he is so popular and timeless in the first place? Like, shocker, I know, okay, but let me explain. You can call me a bigot or misogynist all you want. I really don't care. I am very openly confident and have said this in other videos too. But I am, and I will repeat this again, I am not a feminist. I will not bend over backwards to fight for women's rights or whatever nonsense women are pushing these days. I don't care. You want to be seen as an equal? You got it these days, I guess. Now you pay taxes just like I do, and you will be held up to the same standards as your peers will too. Why would I care about feminism these days? Modern feminism is horrible. The first wave of feminism was about actual women's rights. Third wave feminism, which is the version you're living through right now this very instant, is just women convincing other women to be degenerate morons 95% of the time. You can get mad about it all you want. But the fact there's so many OnlyFans accounts and all over the dating apps and even social media, every single female influencer to like some degree pretty much, they're all just a thinly disguised honey trap to make you subscribe monthly to some subscription of them spreading their cheeks wide says otherwise to me. You can get mad about me all you want. You know what I am saying is true even if you don't want to admit it yourself. But it's cool. I'll be the bad guy here because I don't care if I'm seen that way myself, honestly. And I'll say it again. James Bond needs to be a womanizer to be considered James Bond. A James Bond that doesn't objectify women and chase them like it's sport, it's like a lion without any limbs or teeth. You might as well put the shotgun, and put a round or two into the skull, because what's really the point then? You can get mad at me and say, but James Bond doesn't have to be a womanizer, despite the fact we both know the biggest genre of content that sells to women these days is pretty much Porn, because I can't say it on YouTube, but they disguise their fetish by instead trying to mask it up and beautify it in other ways. Oh, we don't like degenerate content the women of today say as 50 Shades of Grey makes hundreds of millions of dollars. We don't like it when handsome men objectify and hunt down the women that he wants, they say, as to this day thousands of Twilight fan accounts still exist churning out Team Edward or Team Jacob fantasies. Even go look at video games. What kind of games do women tend to love the most? It's games like The Sims or games like Dragon Age or Baldur's Gate 3, right? Gee, I wonder why that is. Because they get to roleplay romantic fantasies. There are women watching this video right now that have unironically made a Sims family in the past, where they have put themselves in the game with some guy they were into, whether it was a dude they knew in real life or like an actor they were obsessing over even. And then they roleplayed a life with that guy having kids in their big simulated Sims house. I know you exist. I know some of the women watching this have done that. I'm not shaming you, by the way, either. I'm just saying that if we're going to do this weird, stupid, we gotta modernize for the audience nonsense companies tend to do these days, we have to realize all this ends up doing is going against our very basic natures. It's like raising a tiger and believing that if we can make it believe that it's a kitty cat somehow, that it'll totally be safe to release that tiger that's massive in a pen full of small cats and nothing bad will happen. You're stupid. Those cats are going to be turned into sushi by that tiger in like 2 minutes flat. Saying you're going to make a James Bond game and then remove what is arguably the most integral part to why men see James Bond as a power fantasy is just ridiculous to me. The same way women can read smut novels and roleplay Edward Cullen as their husband in Sims, men fantasize about being super spies, superheroes, or whatnot, getting the hot girl and just saving the day pretty much. Every man watching this video has fantasized about the scenario of sacrificing themselves in a blaze of glory to save their loved ones. Don't even lie about it. Every man watching this has seen somewhere in like real life where it's lightly snowing or something else and thought, you know what, that'd be a good place to bleed out as you defeat the bad guys and save your family and you like bleed out and die on the rock. You know what I mean? We all thought about that. Every man watching this has thought about to some capacity like things like Roman empires, what they would have done if they were in that boxing match where someone lost. Or you've probably had a dream where they were Spider-Man or Batman beating up criminals and breaking limbs. I've had so many dreams where I'm Spider-Man, it's ridiculous, dude. Like, can we just admit that there were just things the two genders do by definitions that they see because it's like encoded into our DNA pretty much? I've never wanted to play Sims and play, make-believe daddy to an imaginary family, but have I played a Batman game and walked Batman to the edge of a building looking out at Gotham City while it lightly rains, believing for a second that I'm Batman in that very moment until I swoop down off that building and break some guy's femur? Absolutely. So you gotta be lying if you don't think that Bond being a womanizer isn't important to his character at all. If I made a Bond game, I would have unironically a full skill tree that gains experience by Bond seeking out women, and the more womanizing he does, the more powerful he becomes. Because James Bond as a video game should have collectibles like various panties from the women he sleeps with, and I stand by that. And if you think that's lewd or wrong, you really don't understand James Bond or its fan base at all. James Bond is as much a womanizer as he is a super spy. You can't have one without the other. It's like having cereal without milk and then some soy-filled blue-haired activist trying to convince you that eating cereal with ketchup is just as valid as milk some days. Like, if you don't get out of my face with that nonsense, well, help me God, dude. I'm tired of these developers, these creators and these activists, whoever, believing that they'll be the ones to crack the genetic Rosetta Stone on male power fantasy somehow. If I wanted to play a super spy-like character who saves the day and doesn't chase women, I would play Tomb Raider, not James Bond. I said what I said. I have spoken. I will not budge on this opinion. I will die on this hill. Earlier in December, that same narrative director, Martin Emborg, also spoke to Polygon about James Bond and all that too, as you can see here. They started that interview talking about how this version of James Bond is searching for his purpose and is somewhat aimless in the beginning until he discovers his destiny, so to speak, by the end. Which is, yeah, a pretty good angle, I will admit, if you want to modernize Bond in some way that is actually healthy for his character. And that this version of Bond apparently is more brash, arrogant, and kind of just falls into this world not really knowing what to expect. Which is also an interesting idea, I guess on paper anyways, but then Martin Emborg also claims during this interview that he believes that IO Interactive's version of James Bond is more in line with Ian Fleming's original version of the character, which, in case you somehow don't know, Fleming created James Bond originally in his novels that this all started in, obviously. Hilarious though, Polygon then recites Sean Connery himself, who played Bond in the past, and how back in the today when Connery was interviewed by Playboy that he fully admits that Bond cannot exist without embracing both his masculine and, this is key, toxic sides altogether, because that's what makes Bond, well, James Bond. Here's what Sean Connery said to Playboy years ago. It reads, "He is really a mixture of all that the defenders and the attackers say he is. When I spoke about Bond with Ian Fleming, he said that when the character was conceived, Bond was a very simple, straightforward, blunt instrument of the police force, a functionary who would carry out his job rather doggedly. But he also had a lot of idiosyncrasies that were considered snobbish, such as a taste for special wines, etc., etc. But if you take Bond in the situations that he is constantly involved with, you see that it is a very hard, high, unusual league that he plays in. Therefore, he is quite right in having all of his senses satisfied, be it that word I can't say on YouTube, wine, food, or clothes." As Sean Connery said, you can't have James Bond without playing into him, as he said, snobbish, idiosyncratic behaviors, because what makes Bond interesting aren't necessarily just his strengths, but honestly his vices and his weaknesses. We only have to remember, as super heroic Bond is in the movies and books, he is still just a man. He is as susceptible to persuasion and betrayal like any one of us. So to remove his, I guess we'll say, toxic traits like being a womanizer and being a skirt chaser is to remove what's honestly interesting about him in the first place. Because that's who Bond is. It's like removing a fish's ability to swim or breathe underwater. At that point, just put the poor thing out of its misery. James Bond is meant to be a womanizing super spy, the same way that Martin Emborg guy is making it sound, but who knows, maybe Bond is a womanizing a-hole in this game, which I genuinely hope he is. And that these websites and whatever are just, misquoting what IO Interactive is saying here, but the way that Martin Emborg is making First Light sound, at least right now, it's almost as if First Light is like the human resources version of Ian Fleming's titular character, if that makes any sense. But if there's anything Bond doesn't need, it's to take into account what female viewers think of the character, because by objective box office performance and longevity of his legacy, even women tend to enjoy James Bond because he is also a womanizer too. Women obviously love dangerously emotionally unavailable men. They go for them all of the time. The men, even in their romance novels that they read all the time too, they also tend to be these exact sort of archetypes who eventually, through the love and care of the protagonist, who's always a female, ends up breaking the cold, hard shell of these masculine, cold-hearted male heartthrob characters all of the time. Edward Cullen is an obvious choice, and he's literally cold-blooded. I mean, he's a vampire. I have no idea how he even gets it up, because technically blood has to move. You get the point. But anyway, we also have Christian Grey from 50 Shades of Grey. That's another obvious pick, too. He's also, of course, a billionaire, because women love hypergamy, even if they, won't admit it, I guess. You got Batman, that also is this, too. He's handsome and a billionaire. You got Spider-Man. He's super fit, nerdy, and all that. Hell, even in any rom-com ever, pretty much. The guy is always some complicated, rugged individual. Go look at literally anything Hallmark makes when it comes to movies these days that are about romance, pretty much. Some made the argument that with Daniel Craig's Bond, as Screen Rant did here a few years back, that Bond's womanizing behavior was actually a defense mechanism created by Craig's version because of the loss of his first love interest, Vesper, in Casino Royale. By the way, Casino Royale, that's my favorite Bond movie ever. And that every subsequent woman that he got with, I guess, in those movies, ending with Madeline, of course, in No Time to Die, was nothing but a fling to protect his heart from how emotionally devastating he felt after the death of Vesper. I mean, the sequel movie Quantum of Solace is quite literally named to mean an ounce of hope, pretty much, continues on this sentiment as well. But while Craig's version of Bond may have been recontextualized in his womanizing way somewhat, he still ultimately was a womanizer and got with women regardless, because even then the creators and producers of that 5-movie spread starring Daniel Craig knew that at his heart, James Bond was always going to be James Bond. And that if they emasculated the character, it would lead to backlash and people walking away, which hilariously the very same Daniel Craig era of movies did exactly that, and it did not work out for them. Famously, in No Time to Die, the final Craig Bond movie, you had the infamous shot of James Bond sitting on the back of a motorcycle holding the hips of another 00 agent who picks him up. This one shot alone was like cataclysmic to Bond fans, because it was showing that the modern sensibilities of today's environment and culture was now even too great for James Bond of all things not to cater and bow down to as well, like everything else has pretty much. It shows that his mentality that Bond should listen to women or become subservient to them was a humiliation ritual, and it is. And No Time to Die is largely seen as an uneven, borderline, not very good James Bond movie, which was frustrating since Casino Royale and Skyfall were really great films. But the other big problem, in my opinion, when it comes to James Bond in the modern era is that current day Britain is arguably, I gotta say, not a society really worth fighting for either. There's so much wrong going on with Britain today, and if you live there, you can literally be thrown in jail for mean tweets or saying something wrong on Facebook even. Which is why setting a James Bond game in modern day feels even more tone deaf and pointless, because you're effectively playing a James Bond. who is by definition protecting the very anti-free speech, anti-British sensibilities that are ravaging that nation as we speak. Ultimately, no matter what evil you're stopping in first light, you are still by definition protecting a nation that quite literally subjugates its own people to mass online censorship and pushes the very modern-esque concepts onto their populace that has resulted in a Britain that is anything but honestly British anymore, but instead a hollowed-out husk of a nation that is being turned into a very first world disaster more than really anything else. And if there's anything that modern young men seek more than a purpose or longing, it's that young men completely, no matter where they are pretty much these days, they all pretty much unanimously agree that they would not protect or, die for the nations that they live in within, because these nations, they don't really care about them anymore. Nationalism, if you will, in a sense, especially if you live in Britain or say Canada or even Australia, these sorts of countries have done everything in their power to erase the values and principles that these nations were founded on because they cater to activist communist freaks, and that's just to name some. That really cannot be denied. Just look at the absolute state of these places. Police officers would rather arrest you for speaking out against the problems in Britain than actually taking the problems within them, because if they do that, they would be seen as problematic. So what you're left with is a video game set in modern times playing a character who is apparently in line with these modern day beliefs, who doesn't see women as objects to be desired or pursued anymore, despite every single depiction of the character before then being exactly that, by the way. But you are now meant to embody this character who represents a genuine totalitarian government that controls its citizens through censorship, scare tactics, and more, and somehow see this new version of what Bond is doing here as an MI6 operative as anything positive, really, when it isn't. Let's be real, this version of Bond, if they found Somalian daycares in Britain, this version of Bond would hunt you down and silence you. That's just the reality. Now, if IO Interactive were based, they would make the plot of First Light be about James Bond working to uncover and unravel the totalitarian regime of Britain's corrupt government. But it's very likely they won't be doing that because, for one, the game would likely not be allowed to be sold in Britain because it would be seen as propaganda, which is rich considering the British government is what it is. And that would also go against the government's rules, which is insanely ironic given the circumstances like I just said, but it would also paint Britain's government as being exactly what it is seen by anyone who objectively lives outside of its sphere of control, which the British government would very like not want to happen. And since Bond is technically a British-made story and IP, I would wager that IO Interactive probably had to sign paperwork to ensure they do not portray Britain and its government or people in any negative way. So what I believe ultimately will happen is you're going to be playing an emasculated James Bond who respects all women now and protects the quite literal V for Vendetta-esque real-world equivalent government of Britain with his blood, sweat, and tears. What this means for me anyways is that this Bond, if it doesn't tackle the absolute state of Britain going on right now, makes this Bond and his journey a fight and honestly not worth fighting for in my opinion. Because if you're going to be selling me a Bond game that removes the core qualities of his character while ignoring the real-world nonsense surrounding his employment and what he stands for, what are we doing here? Might as well just call him James Globalist Agent Bond at that point, not really 00, and put a rainbow pin flag on his jacket, and why not a blue streak in his hair with a septum piercing while you're at it, because I mean, that's what he's protecting anyways. Even if IO Interactive were to set this game in the past, like say the 60s or the 70s, they would still probably mess it up anyways, and just make James Bond act like some millennial who went to community college instead of the rugged, absolutely 100% based British man Bond would be in that time period instead. They would just pretend like a James Bond born in the 50s or the 60s or even the 40s would not be the most basest, and let's be honest, probably racist man to ever exist, because in that time period, he would be. So what you get instead is this Molotov cocktail of globalist belief systems, I guess, instead. Again, if IO Interactive is actually willing to prove me wrong, then the plot of this game will be James, Bond undoing the pro-censorship British government. But since this is unfortunately modern Western gaming and writing, it probably won't be. Just look at Moneypenny and M in this game too. They're also super diverse because they got to depict Britain as this melting pot of cultures. Now look, even though I said all this, I'm not saying the game will be bad to play or will look bad or anything. In contrary, it does still look fun to play. But the problem with modern gaming was never really about the gameplay or the way that the world looked or the sound of guns shooting or how fists sound when they connect with a bad guy's face. Those have always been good. It's instead always been the writing, the characters, the story, and the overall intention of the people behind these games and how they tend to take built-in legacy franchises built by other people in the past and then instead using them as ideologically driven vehicles like digital Trojan horses to enter your mind and home to indoctrinate you with more modern Slav propaganda. Now again, I hope I'm wrong. I hope Bond is everything that I want it to be and then some, but I've been burned so many times, so frequently by Western gaming in the past already, that I've played games where I'm in medieval Bohemia of all places and I can't even enter Christian churches as a Muslim guy tells my Christian main character that he lives like a barbarian in Kingdom Come 2. Unironically, that's real. That's in the game. I've also lived long enough to see Batman get shot in the face by Harley Quinn as she utters the words, "It's our turn now," menacingly, and I've also lived long enough to see Dragon Age's world of Thetis get reduced to just purple hues and horrific fanfiction and gender ideology that completely undermines over 15 years of world building to appeal to these activist morons. I have lived long enough to see many of my favorite franchises get sacked, ruined, and destroyed because all of these people can't help themselves when it comes to honestly ruining everything that they touch because they can't allow you to just have true escapism these days. And none of this fills me with confidence, and truly the worst thing that IO Interactive could have admitted before the release of First Light was confidently declaring that their game would be set with the modern values and the standards of the world and society that it is depicting within its world. You might as well just take James Bond out back, put a bag over his head, and shoot him dead while you're at it too, because that's pretty much what you're doing. Because a James Bond game where he doesn't chase women apparently and unironically protects globalist values is like a Call of Duty game where the heroes are Yahtzees shooting unarmed civilians pretty much. As seen here from Variety to close out this video, for the second year in a row also, movie theaters are struggling and unable to hit the box office levels they require to function these days. So why do you think Marvel is currently bringing back Steve Rogers and having teasers for Thor as well for Avengers Doomsday even? Because people are tired of their media being ruined and they want what works. And the quicker you realize that you need to make games and media for the old ways that it used to be, the better that you will be for it in the future too. A James Bond game where he's a womanizer who takes down the modern British government would be insanely based and yes, an instant buy. But to be real with you guys, I just don't think that's what's in the cards. Instead, you're going to get an Uncharted meets Hitman game where James is nothing but a lapdog for a modern government that hates its own people and imprisons them for the very things that James Bond used to exemplify in the past, and that's just the truth. And that is why a modernized James Bond with modern values is the biggest red flag I think I've seen in a very long time. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments, subscribe, thanks for watching, see you next time, and oh yeah, Happy New Year.